Hello everyone. Welcome to the Tech Talk. Today Satyendra will explain about the Zeebe way process management tool basically. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ping your questions on the chat. We are monitoring the chat continuously and we will be happy to answer all the questions that you have about it. Satyendra, please start.
Great. Thanks, Ritesh. Hello, everyone. I'm Satyendra Singh, and welcome to today's session on process management using Zeebe. So, to start with, let's take a look at all the keywords that we'll come across in today's session. So, you'll be hearing process a lot today. So, process is a series of steps taken in order to achieve a goal, and then BPMN. Um, it is a graphical representation or graphical notation of your process. Okay, then we'll see a modeler, which is a software that helps us create PPMNs. Camunda is a software company that created Zeebe. And finally, Zeebe is the workflow engine for microservice orchestration. And Operate, now this tool will help us monitor any process instances that are running in Zeebe. So let's talk about Zeebe. So Zeebe, by definition, like it's a workflow engine used for microservice orchestration. So two important terms here: workflow engine and microservice orchestration. So workflow is a series of steps taken to achieve a goal. Um, so a workflow engine is a software which it's a software application that manages a workflow for a business process. So it manages like what activities should take place after the completion of other activities. Okay. And what we are trying to achieve is like it's used for microservice orchestration. So microservice orchestration, this is a concept which has to do with how microservices interact with each other. Now, if you look at this image here, right? So it's orchestra going on, and if you take any two musicians, right? So they don't look at each other and decide to play their parts, right? They're looking at the conductor, and conductor is their guide. Like conductor will ask them to play their part, and they will play their part, right? So similar to this, there is one microservice which plays the role of conductor, and then there are other microservices which interact using via this conductor. Okay, so this setup is called microservice orchestration. Um, let's look at a sample use case. So say an e-commerce application, right? Upon order confirmation will probably do some of these steps. Say it creates an order with the product for a user, and then it sends a notification to customer, and then sends confirmation notification to warehouse, and then probably later they can do dispatch and other things. So if we code it out, we might create a function which looks something like this. So if we convert this into a BPMN, which is a graphical notation, it will look something like this. Okay, the workflow will start. It will do a bunch of steps in series, and then it will terminate. Okay, and this process has an identifier, okay, which is here. It is called process underscore confirm order. So this is the identifier for this workflow. So let's talk with an example. Okay, suppose I create a workflow which looks something like this. Okay, and the name of the workflow is process underscore demo. Okay, this blue item, right? This blue thing, this is Zeebe. Okay, and then this green color, this is my application. Okay, this is our application. So suppose I have a function, right, which creates a Zeebe process. Okay? So I trigger this function using an API. Okay, there has to be some trigger to start processes. So right, so suppose I trigger a function using this API, and then this function creates a workflow instance in Zeebe. So it starts a Zeebe process for process demo. Okay, so Zeebe already has a copy of this workflow. So when I say start a workflow for this process, it knows. Okay, it can identify by this name. And I'm also sending some data. Okay, so what I'm saying is basically start a copy of this workflow with this data. Okay, and this data is a JavaScript object, so it can have more than one fields, right? So here, for example, we are passing something called status with a value 0. So here Zeebe will start, right? And at this point, it will start with status, is equal to 0. This will have this data. So it will move ahead and then it will see, okay, I have to perform this task. Now Zeebe itself doesn't perform any task, right? It will just manage the workflow. So when it comes here, okay, it will ask the application to perform or call a function which is associated with this task. Okay, and we will create a function in our application associated with this task. So this function will be triggered. Okay, and when this function is triggered, it will be triggered with this data. So it will be called with this data. And then after completion, it will come here and then take a decision based on this status, and status is 0. So it will follow this path. And same thing, it will, trigger a function in the application which is associated with task 2. Okay. Now, suppose in this workflow, right, at this step, we change status from 0 to 1, right? We change the status to 1. Then when it comes here, it will follow this path, right, where status equal to 1. And then it will, look for a function with associated with activity task 3, which will be this function. Okay. So what we can do here is, so this was a simple layout with one microservice. So this is one microservice. We can split the functions into two separate microservices, right? So this is, the green color is microservice 1 and the yellow color is microservice 2. So this way, this is now microservice orchestration. This is one application and these two microservices are interacting via this. And we can, this is good for scaling, right? We can scale these separately and scale this separately.
But Satyendra, one question: this GB here, which you showed in the blue box, right?
Right.
That is that acts like a single point of failure for the system. I mean, if the GB is down, then your whole system is down.
Okay. So Zeebe internally, Ritesh, it will have, it's not one broker. It can have multiple brokers,
Okay.
right? So if one of them fail, there are other to take its load while this thing comes back up.
Okay. Okay. And the communication between GB and microservices happen over which tier? I mean, HTTP or some other protocol we use to communicate?
So it uses gRPC internally. So if you have a language, so your application is suppose a node. So you
Hmm.
will have a client or node
Hmm.
client, which will be between your application and Zeebe, right?
Okay.
And this communicates using gRPC.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, let's see a demo. Okay. So to set up, our system for demo, we'll need to visit some of the links, right? Obviously, getting started and then Camunda docs, and then this is an important link which will give us Zeebe profiles. So if you go to this link, this is a GitHub link, and you check out. So you will have something like this, right? Zeebe Docker Compose folder. So here, what it does is it gives you a bunch of profiles you can run Zeebe with, right? Say if you want to um, run a cluster with 3 brokers or more brokers, you can run, a cluster version. So for demonstration, we'll be running a single broker Zeebe with an operate profile. Okay. So while this is, coming up, I will show you Modeler. So Modeler is a software which helps us create BPMNs. So here I have created a workflow, the one that I showed in the presentation. So it's a workflow which starts and it has task 1, and then there is a decision based on status, and then it can choose to go to task 2 or task 3. So this workflow, if I check the properties panel, okay, this is the identifier for this workflow, right? So this is called process demo. So from my code, if I have to ask Zeebe to create instances for this workflow, I have to use this name. Okay. And then if I check one of the tasks, okay, so the identifier is activity 1. So in my code, I have to create function and associate it with this name in order for it to call in place of task 1. And same thing for task 2 and task 3. And this is a decision box. And in one of the path for decision box, we have specified a condition, status is equal to 1. So if status is equal to 1, it will come here. And this one is a default workflow. You see the small tick mark here, right? So this tick mark says that it's a default workflow, means it's like an else condition. So if doesn't happen, then go to that. So if I visit localhost 8080 after starting the application, you can see we have this operate dashboard. And from the modeler, we will deploy this work. So Zeebe will start at port 36500 on local. Deployment succeeded. And I have created another workflow for today's demo, so I'll deploy this one also. Okay, deployment succeeded. So when we deploy these in operate, so you can log in with demo, right? So we'll have two processes, two workflows created, right? Process demo and process event demo. But right now there are no running instances. Okay, so now Zeebe setup is ready. Let's look at the application that is going to use Zeebe, right? So I am going to use a node application. So I have created two applications, application 1 and application 2, okay, which will simulate, our example from the presentation of two microservices. Okay, so let's look at the code in application 1. Okay. So we have a Zeebe service, which like essentially, uh, has two important functions. One is it will create a process instance, and the other one is it will associate a function with a activity name. Let's see how we use it. So this is the app controller. We have an API, which is a post API. So this takes a process name from the param and request body that we send, and it will create a process instance in Zeebe using the process name and the data that we use to call the API. Okay, then we have two functions. One is, very conveniently named handler 1 and handler 2. And handler 1 is associated with activity task 1. Handler 2 is associated with activity task 2. Okay, so this function will be called whenever Zeebe will ask us to, do work for task 1. And this function will be called when Zeebe asks us to do task for activity task 2. I'm going to start application 1. And I'm going to start app 2. Okay, so both the applications are started. Okay, right, so applications are started. So this one is running on port 3000 and this one is running on port 3001. Okay, and I have prepared these APIs. Okay, so like we have an API in the first application, right? Which is running on port 3000. So I will call, sorry, I will call an API with process demo with this data. Okay, so data that I am going to start the API with is two fields. One is my process ID, which is a some ID I have given, and the other field is status, which is 0. So okay, so I have called this, and the response we can see we have got a process definition key. This thing BPMN process ID is process demo version and process instance key. Okay, now this response is coming from Zeebe. So if I check the application log, right? So right now I called application 1. So what happened? So after I called my API, a process started in Zeebe. Okay, and then it called the handler 1 for activity task 1. It called handler 2 for activity task 2. Okay, and if we check operate, if I go to completed task, yeah, it completed. Okay, we'll try and stop the process in between. Okay, so for that, we will go to the code and we will unregister one of the workflows. We'll unregister one of the workflows. Okay, yeah, so application 1 started again, and we will call this API once again. Okay, so now when we come here, okay, yeah, we can see the process is still running. So what it did is it started, executed activity task 1. It took a decision based on status, because status here, right? We can see the variables this workflow has. Status is 0. So it followed this path, and now it is waiting for task 2 to complete. Okay, and now because we have unregistered the workflow, unregistered the job, there is no task for activity task 2, right? So this workflow is kind of waiting. It is stuck here. Right. So back to the code, right? I will register the task handler again, and we will monitor the application log. Yeah, it immediately does the activity task 2, and this one, right? Now this is completed. Okay. Let us call this API with status 1 so that it follows this path. This time I will pass status as 1. Okay. If we see the application logs, right? This workflow started here. It did activity task 1, and then in the second application, it did activity task 3. And the workflow that this thing followed is probably one of the applications, right? This one. Okay. So you can see that every time I, start a workflow instance, it creates a separate copy, with its own variables, and it can do this parallelly. So this was the first application, which is, straightforward, executing tasks in serial manner. Okay. For our next demo, we have a workflow which looks like this. Okay. So you see this starts, and then it waits here. Okay, it waits here for a message. This is a message event. Okay, so this will wait here for a message, and then when we get a message, it will then proceed. Okay, to trigger the second process, this is the API. Okay, this API, the process name is process event demo. I'm going to call this with process ID 101 and status as 0. Copy. Okay, this workflow has started. Okay, this is now waiting here. Okay, what happens if I call this again? Okay, I will call it again. This time I will 102, sorry, 102, and status is 1. Okay. So yeah, we have two processes running at the same time, and both of them are waiting. So if I go into this is also waiting, and if I come back and go into this is also waiting here, right? You can see there are two different process IDs. Okay, both of them are waiting. So this message um, is like an event which we will have to send to Zeebe, and for every message to resolve, right, this needs a unique identifier. So in this case, I'm going to be using my process ID as a unique identifier. So I will kind of like publish an event to Zeebe and say that this event belongs for this process ID, and it will be able to resolve and go ahead. So that you can use this in something like, you have asked some other service which is async in nature. So it takes your request and doesn't reply you back immediately, and probably after some time it replies back to you, and then you can resume your workflow by publishing an event. So publish an event, I have built an API for this. This thing is on the second application. So it needs it needs a unique identifier, which is my process ID. If I call this API, right, I'm calling this for process ID 101, right? So this is going to trigger this one, right? A message for this one, and this will go ahead and complete, right? Whereas process ID for this thing is 102. So this will continue to wait. One zero one. Yeah, this is now completed. So status variable was 0. So it went ahead and followed the task 2 path. Okay. So now let's look at this one. So process ID here is 102 and status here is 1. Okay. I can change the value of status when I publish my event, right? So let's do this. So we'll publish a message for process 102 with status 0. So I will publish for 102 with status 0. Okay. Yeah. So this one also completed. For the message event, right, when we create a BPMN workflow, instead of this, you can also have, a bunch of timer events, and right. So you start an application and then you can proceed with a task block, and then you can have events, right? So you can have, say, timer events, right? You can make it wait for, say, some time, say 10 minutes or 1 hour, and then proceed with your workflow. Okay. So yeah, that's it for the demo today. Thank you guys.
Okay, so Satyendra, I have few questions. So
Sure.
normally when we build an enterprise application, right?
Right.
So we always need a user object in all our functions, which we call it as a context object. Basically, we need it because of auditing purpose. Who called the API or who called the function, when it was called, who modified the data. So in
Right.
the GB workflow, once it is triggered, how is that context object obtained in each function?
Okay. So this thing, Ritesh, you'll have to manage in the code. You pass something, okay, that is like unique in your code as a variable to Zeebe workflow, and you can read it in the code and work with it.
So basically, you are saying that first request that goes to triggers that GB, I have to pass the entire context object to GB, and then
Correct.
GB can pass it back to all my functions that are
All my
executing.
correct. Yes, it can do that. But as best practice says that pass the minimum amount of variables that you need to complete the workflow. You can
Okay,
pass a whole bunch of other information, but try to keep it minimum. Otherwise, it builds up memory. And
okay. And this is like GB is like a paid tool or a free tool?
okay, so Zeebe itself is open source. It is free to use. Some parts of the Zeebe that we saw today, say Operate, right? Operate is a licensed software, so it is free to use in non-production environments. But Zeebe itself, the brokers which is working at the core of what we saw today, that is open source. That is free to use.
Okay, okay. And where does it store this data, tasks and all those things? Does it store in a
Right.
database
It uses Elasticsearch internally.
internally? So basically, you are also responsible for the deployment of the Elasticsearch when you are spawning an instance of GB.
So Camunda is the company which created Zeebe, right? So they give you, like, you can use it as a service from them,
Mhm.
or you can do it self-managed. If you do it self-managed, you're responsible for hosting it. And there is a huge community, so you'll find Helm charts and Kubernetes deployment helps you'll find online.
Okay, okay. And is there a limit to the number of process we can execute parallelly, or is there a higher bound to it?
Okay, you're talking about how scalable this is.
No, I'm talking about the number of this, what do we call, number of this process line in the top left corner you are seeing, process event
Right, right.
demo. Is one
Okay.
of them we are executing in your case, two of them we are executing, right?
Right, right, right.
So how
No,
many
there
I can
is.
execute parallelly?
So they did a benchmark. So what they say is, if you increase the number of brokers, you can increase the number of instances you can run at the
Okay,
parallelly. It scales linearly. So yeah, that is
okay,
there.
okay, okay.
So
So,
right now I started it with a single broker. So
okay.
I think I'm not sure it should be able to handle good amount of at least hundreds of instances. You can increase the number of broker. You can start it with 3 broker, 5 broker, 8 brokers, and it will scale.
Okay, so Ankit is saying that they are using Camunda Platform 7, and then it uses Postgres to store the data.
Okay.
PostgreSQL to store the data of these workflows, like task 1, task 2, and decision metrics and all those things. Please feel free to ask the questions. I'm looking at the chat, we can answer.
There is a tool like this by Netflix also. It's called Netflix Conductor.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
it is like, it has a little more features than Zeebe, but then um, Zeebe, the idea is it is minimal and it is simple and lightweight.
Okay, okay. Is this the enterprise version of Camunda? Ankit is asking, is it a enterprise version of Camunda?
So parts of it is, what do you say, open source. Like like I said, the Zeebe, which is working at core, that is open source. But this Operate, right? This UI that we see, the tool that we see to view the
Hmm.
UI, this thing is a licensed software. For development purposes, it is available. For production use, you cannot use this.
Okay, so how much does it cost, this license? Do you have idea?
Uh, so like, I'm not sure, based on their website, right? They have, custom to your needs, and they have a professional, what do you say, subscription, and then they have an enterprise subscription. I think professional is around $1,000 a month, and
Okay,
enterprise is, based on your need, they will evaluate and they will give you a estimate of
okay,
price.
okay. So I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining the TED Talk today. We will send a feedback link to know about the TED Talk and to improve more on that. So please feel free to enter your feedback in that feedback form. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Satyendra or me, and we can set up any meeting to clear any doubts or help in any setup that is required for any project.
Sure. Thanks, Ritesh. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you, everyone.